So every single year, tens of thousands of Christians gather in the old city of Jerusalem to celebrate Easter and to take part in the Holy Fire ceremony. But this year there were a lot less people. Why is that? Because a lot of Palestinians were not allowed to enter Jerusalem. Because ever since October the 7th, the Israeli government has imposed a law saying that in order for Palestinians to be allowed entry into Jerusalem, they need a special permit. And to celebrate Easter, they have to enter Jerusalem, but they need to get the permit. And the Israeli government has made it very difficult for these people to get permits. And so less Palestinians meant that there were less people in the old city of Jerusalem to celebrate Easter. And this Easter in the old city of Jerusalem was much more moribund, much more gloomy, and it was much more sad because there weren't a whole lot of Palestinians there. They weren't as many Palestinians as they usually were. And so there was an article that was published about this. It was published by The Guardian, and it says here that the crowd that assembled outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre on Thursday morning was small and muted. Why is that? Because there weren't as many Palestinians. International pilgrims jostled with dark-robed Greek Orthodox monks, but one group of native worshippers was noticeably absent: Palestinians. For generations, the tens of thousands of Palestinian Christians living in Israeli-occupied West Bank villages and cities such as Ramallah, Bethlehem, and Taiba would travel to Jerusalem's Old City at Easter to take part in the prayers, processions, and rituals such as the Holy Fire ceremony. So there were less Palestinians this year, and that is because the Israeli government has made it much more difficult for Palestinian Christians to enter Jerusalem to celebrate Easter. And the Israeli government makes the argument that they are simply trying to prevent terrorism. But Palestinian Christians are not terrorists. Plus, in the West Bank, your religion is on your ID card. So the Israelis would know if the Palestinian trying to gain entry into Jerusalem was a Christian. They would know just by looking at the ID card. So they are using the problem of terrorism as a pretext to persecute Christians. And this is only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. And because the persecution against Christians in Israel has been increasing within this decade. And it says here in this article that yet centuries of tradition have been ruptured by Israel's increasingly draconian control over Palestinian movement, which means any Palestinian in the West Bank living outside Jerusalem must obtain a military permit if they want to enter the city. For years, Christians in Palestinian territories were regularly granted permits to visit Jerusalem around Easter, but since the war with Hamas broke out on October the 7th, 2023, they have become almost impossible to obtain. They're making it difficult for the Christians to celebrate Easter. Why is this? Well, because they hate Christians. Not every single Israeli hates Christians, surely not. There are Israelis who are against persecuting Christians. They are Israelis who are repulsed about the fact that they are fanatics in Israel who spit upon Christians. But the problem is that the fanatics are growing in numbers. Their ranks are swelling, and it's only going to get worse from here. This is the reason why the hardliners in Israel want to render the Israeli Supreme Court useless. They want to diminish the power and the authority of the Israeli Supreme Court because they want to give all the power to the Israeli parliament or to the Knesset. The Knesset is the parliament. Because they know that their numbers are growing. They know that the nationalists are very powerful in Israel. And so they know all they have to do is just pack the Knesset with their people, make themselves the majority in the Knesset, and with the Supreme Court rendered useless, powerless, they can pass whatever despotic ruling that they want. Any tyrannical, despotic decree that they want to pass, they can do it if the Supreme Court is not there to be a hindrance to them. And so imagine if there is no Supreme Court. These fanatics, these lunatics, could then pass laws against Christians. For example, some years ago, there were these Israeli lawmakers who wanted to pass a law that would put people in prison for preaching Jesus Christ in Israel, for teaching people about Jesus Christ in Israel. Now, Netanyahu stopped it. He stopped it because he doesn't want this sort of fanaticism to take over Israel. Plus, if you allow such persecution to become law, to become legislation, then that would anger people in the Western world, and it would threaten and jeopardize the relationship between Israel and the Western world. So it wouldn't be good. But just imagine if the fanatics really become the preponderating faction in Israel. Add to that a powerless Supreme Court, and you would have a very fanatical and despotic country, and you would have really systematic persecution of Christians. It would be very, very ugly. This Easter, the government announced it had issued 6,000 permits for Palestinian Christians to enter Jerusalem to celebrate Easter, though there are 50,000 Christians, mostly Catholic or Greek Orthodox, living in the West Bank beyond East Jerusalem. However, in reality, just 4,000 were given, according to Christian leaders, and often only to a few members of each family who applied. And they're saying, well, this is just to fight terrorism because of October the 7th. The Israelis were not slaughtered by Christians. They were slaughtered by Islamists. Why are you blocking Christians? Why are you stopping Christians from celebrating Easter in Jerusalem? And there are videos of Christians being arrested by Israeli police officers. Why is this? Because Ben-Gvir controls the police. That's the reason why. Ben-Gvir is a fanatical Israeli. He hates Christians. In fact, if you do not believe me, if you're one of these hosperists who think that, well, Israel is just this beacon of democracy and is not going down this spiral towards fanaticism, maybe you mean well, maybe you just don't know. But there is an audio recording that you can listen to of Ben-Gvir from about, I want to say 6 or so years ago. And Ben-Gvir is asked in an Israeli radio interview, what do you think about people spitting on Christians? And Ben-Gvir says, spitting on Christians is a Jewish tradition.
דובי, קודם כל יש מנהג יהודי קדום, שכשעוברים ליד מנזר או ליד כומר יורקים. אפשר להסכים או לא להסכים, אבל כאשר יורקים לצד, אני לא חושב שזה מבטא...
יש גם מנהג יהודי, כל מנהג יהודי קדום אנחנו חייבים לקיים, תגיד?
לא, זה לא העניין. זה לא העניין. העניין הוא למה להפוך את זה לעניין פלילי.
This is what this guy says. It's a Jewish tradition to spit on Christians. So the problem is Ben-Gvir has a lot of followers, and people like him are growing in numbers. And so if you have this sort of way of thinking dominating the society, it's going to ruin the whole country. Listen, I understand there are people who are very pro-Israel. I don't hate these people. They mean well. A lot of them mean well. Some of them don't. And there is this belief that Israel is this beacon of democracy and freedom. Now, to be fair, for a very long time, this has been the case. For decades, Christians have been treated decently in Israel. For decades and decades, Christians have had freedom in Israel, and they still have freedom in Israel to go to church. To go to church. If you're living in Israel, or if you're living in Jerusalem, you have the freedom to go to church. But what we are seeing are signs that bespeak a coming fanaticism and despotism. And my whole point is not exactly what's happening now, although I am focusing on what's happening now, but I am focusing on what's happening now as signs for what to expect in the future. And I am focusing on the future. I understand that Israel today is a democracy, but I am concerned about what Israel is going to become. And what I fear is that they're going to bring back the Sanhedrin. And remember what Jesus Christ said. he said, there will be a time when they will bring you to the synagogue to persecute you. There will be a time when they will bring you to the synagogue. That's a prophecy. And that spirit is still there. That spirit that cried out, crucify him, crucify him. It's there. It's like a demon that's just in this sleep mode, but it's starting to reawaken. So it says here that a group from the village of Taibe said the Israeli military still did not allow them to cross over to Jerusalem for Palm Sunday, even though they had valid permits. So even though these people had valid permits, they weren't allowed entry. The few who do make it to the Old City have been met with increased police brutality in recent years. In April of 2023, Palestinian Christian worshippers and international pilgrims were beaten by Israeli police and armed forces as they attempted to reach the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. People are very afraid, and many will not risk attending the Easter processions anymore, said Omar Harami, who runs Sabil, a Christian organization based in Jerusalem. He said several staff were beaten last year as they tried to attend Easter festivities in the Old City, and Christians in the Old City regularly faced hostility outside churches or as they went about their daily lives. And I remember years ago, I was talking to this Spanish journalist, and she told me, she said that she went to Israel. And this was back in, I want to say 2018, 2019, somewhere around there. And she said that she was walking around with a Catholic priest. And she said, this guy got spat on like 12 times or something like that. She said it was disgusting. And you'll see this in the article. Persecution against Christians has been increasing in Israel within this decade, I would say. And there's always been fanatics in Israel, but their numbers have been growing. And so therefore, the persecution against Christians has been intensifying over the years. And it says here, since the rise of Jewish ultra-nationalism in Israel and the election of the most far-right government in the country's history, extremist and settler Jewish movements who want to claim all of Israel and Palestinian-controlled territories as a state only for Jews have been emboldened in their actions against both Christians and Muslims. And this is what oh my God. This is what I wish these Christian Zionists would recognize. I wish this would register in their brains. Because the problem is you have these Hosperists, these Israeli propagandists, who love to utilize this argument that says, oh, well, we're going against the Islamization of the world. This is what they always argue. They'll say, Israel is going against Islamization, and that's what we have a problem with. We're fighting, we're on the front line in the war on Islamist terrorism. Okay, fine. You're going against Islamic terrorism. That's a legitimate project. That's a legitimate cause. Why are you going against Christians? Why are you going against Christians? Because it's not about fighting Islam or Islamic terrorism. It's about getting rid of non-Jews. And it's about hating and persecuting Christians because Christians declare Jesus to be the true Jewish Mashiach, Jewish Messiah. And they hate that. And they will persecute Muslims. And the problem is Christians, Zionist Christians in America will say, oh, they're persecuting Muslims, that's okay. And you will read horrific stories of persecution on Muslims. The murder of Muslim people in Palestinian territories by members of the IDF or settlers. You'll read about these stories. For example, the story of Iyad al-Halak, who was a Palestinian guy who was severely autistic, and he was shot to death by an Israeli soldier, even though he didn't have a weapon, did not pose a threat to anyone. You can look at stories such as that of, there was a story of Mr., I think his name was Mohammed Zaitoun, and Mr. Zaitoun was murdered by an IDF soldier, did not have a weapon on him. In fact, he was a convert to Judaism, murdered by an officer, an Israeli soldier, IDF officer.
אתה יהודי? בטח, איך קוראים לך יהודי? איך קוראים לך? דוד. דוד? בן אברהם מטומטם. בן אברהם, יופי. בבקשה. תיגע בזה, אני ארוג אותך, אתה מבין אותי? הרג אותי. ידיים למעלה עכשיו.
הנה, אתה עם
בדיוק.
מה אתה רוצה?
אני רוצה שאתה תסתום את הפה ולא לזוז.
סתמתי פה, בסדר. הנה, בבקשה, וחזרתי אחורה.
יהודי.
And the officer was not punished at all because the officer simply said, "Oh, I thought he was a terrorist. Oh, okay, you can get away with it." So you have these types of stories, and you tell these stories to these evangelical Zionists, and they'll say, "Yeah, but they're Muslims, so who cares?" Or they're fighting against Muslims, so who cares? Well, for one thing, Muslims are humans too, and not all Muslims are terrorists. And to persecute and to murder Muslim people just because they're Muslim is absolutely evil and immoral. And the thing is that they don't stop at just Muslims. They will go after Christians, as has already been demonstrated. So it says here, religious intolerance and anti-Christian sentiment has been made mainstream by Israeli political leadership. The ultra-hardline National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir described Israelis, and I've already talked about this, spitting on Christians as an old Jewish tradition, and old suspicions have escalated into brazen, all-out violence. In 2023, the Holy Land Roman Catholic Patriarch Pierbattista Pizzaballa accused the government of establishing a, quote, cultural and political atmosphere that can justify or tolerate actions against Christians. And it makes you wonder why Hindu fanatics and fanatical Zionists are such close allies. Here you go. Because you look at the Hindus, the Hindu fanatics, they worship 1,000 gods, Shiva, Kali, Linga, Hare Krishna, all this crazy stuff. They worship the monkey god. They worship all these gods, and fanatical Zionists are hardcore monotheists. They reject any sort of polytheism, but yet they're such close allies. And I would say that Hindus are more hardcore pro-Israel than a lot of Israelis are. And a lot of Israelis are, in fact, annoyed by Hindu nationalists on Twitter. But it makes you wonder why they're such allies. Well, here you go. Because they both hate Christians. Now you could say, well, they both hate Muslims. And that's true, too. But they also both hate Christians. Perfect allies. A recent report by the Rossing Center for Education and Dialogue documented the steep rise in the scale and severity of attacks on Christians in Jerusalem and across Israel in 2024, ranging from spitting at priests and public hate speech to the desecration of graves, arson attacks, and vandalizing churches. It's usually young Israeli Jewish men who are conducting these attacks with impunity. They face very little punishment if the police get involved at all, said John Munayer, the director of international engagement at the Rossing Center. Now, a key word here, or key words, I should say, right here, young Israeli Jewish men. Why is it the youth? Because in Israel, from what I understand, from what I have read, the youth in Israel are, in fact, more religious and more nationalistic than the older folks in Israel. The boomer Israelis tend to be more moderate or secular, whereas this phenomenon of nationalism, ultranationalism, and fanaticism in Israel is seen primarily amongst the youth in Israel. So this is why I say their numbers are swelling, because the younger people are more fanatical, and you're going to continue to have more young people because Israel has a pretty healthy birth rate, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing. It has a pretty healthy birth rate. And so who are having the most kids in Israel? The people who are having the most kids are the most religious. So you're having this high birth rate amongst the most religious faction in Israel. And so as their numbers grow, you're going to see an increase in ultra-nationalistic Israelis. And so this sort of fanaticism is only going to grow. Now you could say, well, it's because of terrorism. Terrorism does play a role in this. Terrorism definitely adds to the tensions and to the rage and to the anger, but you also have to understand that these people do have an ideology that they will subscribe to regardless of the amount of terrorism that exists in Israel. So they're still going to hate Christians. They're still going to see Christians as pagans. They're still going to see the Holy Trinity as a form of paganism and polytheism. They're still going to see Christian churches as pagan temples. And that hatred, that rage, that desire to purge Israel of Christianity is still going to be there regardless of the existence of terrorism. Terrorism is only really a pretext to justify the persecution, just like the Ottoman Empire utilized the existence or pointed to Armenian terrorism as a way to justify the Armenian genocide, just like the Nazis pointed to communism as a threat to justify genociding people in the Soviet Union. This sort of strategy is being utilized amongst Israel's hardliners. And so the article goes on to say, it's a clear attempt by hardcore settler Zionists to Judaize the old city of Jerusalem and trying to make it unbearable for Christians who have been there for centuries. So they want to make the lives of Christians in Israel and in the West Bank so unbearable that these people are going to leave. This is what I'm assuming is the strategy. And the article goes on to say, as he attended the Easter prayer ceremony on Thursday, Father Nikon Golovko, the deputy head of the Russian ecclesiastical mission in Jerusalem, said he had, quote, really seen things change for the worse for Christians in the past 9 years. So according to this Russian Orthodox priest, things have really gotten bad within this decade. And as the quote says, he had, quote, really seen things change for the worse for Christians in the past 9 years. And here's the last part that I highlighted. It says here that this Golovkov guy, am I saying his name correctly? Golovko, Father Golovko has said, we received a lot more hostility and even aggression from the Jewish community. They spit on priests even when we are walking through the Christian quarter. It sends a message that the city belongs not to all communities, but only to the Jews. It was not like this before. Now, I want to focus on something here. It was not like this before. Because it wasn't like this before. When it was under moderates, when Israel was under moderates, it was not like this. My dad grew up in the West Bank, and he will tell you that it wasn't like this. This phenomenon of persecuting Christians in Israel and in the West Bank is something that has popped up and has really amplified within this decade. And it's only going to get worse. And the article goes on to say, after an incident in which Orthodox Jews were caught on video spitting at Christians, Benjamin Netanyahu's office said that Israel was, quote, totally committed to safeguard the sacred right of worship and pilgrimage to the holy sites of all faiths. So Benjamin Netanyahu is against this. Now, the way I see Netanyahu, I'm not a fan of Netanyahu. I think what he has done in Gaza is terrible. But here's the thing. I see Netanyahu almost like I would see Bashar al-Assad. Was Bashar al-Assad bad? He did, his military, his government did certain things that were bad. But removing Bashar al-Assad led to a much worse situation. If you remove Benjamin Netanyahu, or if Benjamin Netanyahu eventually, if he stops being in power, and eventually he will stop being in power because we all have our limits. Once Netanyahu is gone, I believe what will eventually take power in Israel will be something much worse than what we already see. So right now, Israel is under its most right-wing government that it has had in the history of the modern state of Israel. Once Netanyahu is gone, what we are going to get is something far, far worse. As Jesus said, they will take you to the synagogues. And remember what St. Paul said in his letter to the Romans. Not all people who are Israel are actually Israel. And I wish that these Christian Zionists would understand this. Oh, they're God's chosen people. Oh, they were chosen by God. Oh, there's the promise to Abraham. And St. Paul speaks of the children of the promise. Who are the children of the promise? The people who follow the Messiah. And that is Jesus Christ. But you have these evangelical Zionists who want to point to Israel and say, that is what we're supposed to support. And you have to ask yourself the question, are we supposed to support the people who are spitting on crosses? Are we supposed to support the people who are persecuting Christians, attacking churches, making it difficult for Christians to live in Israel or the West Bank? Are we supposed to support the people who will be involved in war crimes in Gaza? Are these the people that we're supposed to support? Am I supposed to support Dennis Prager, who says that the Bible says, men, you can be just as happy with a 15-year-old boy as you would with a 15-year-old girl, which is, the whole statement is absolutely disgusting. Am I supposed to support that guy? That's why Paul says, not everyone who is a part of Israel is Israel. Well, hold on. What does that mean? Not everyone who is a part of Israel is Israel. So they are people who are a part of Israel, but who aren't Israel. What does that mean? he's differentiating between spiritual Israel and earthly Israel. There's earthly Israel, that's Netanyahu, Prager, the IDF, what you see in Israel. That's earthly Israel, earthly Jerusalem. But then there's spiritual Israel. And not everyone who is a part of earthly Israel is actually a part of spiritual Israel. And I wish people would understand that. I thought I would just add that in there. What we are seeing is the rise of Israeli fanaticism, and it's only going to get worse from here. It's only going to get worse. Anyway, those are my thoughts on that. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.